Hi, Cara.
Hello, Vanessa.
We talk a lot about relationships between parents and kids, between kids and each other, between other trusted adults and kids, between siblings, right? There's a million ways we talk about relationships. In this particular episode, we're going to explore, for the most part, kids' relationships with each other, friendships, romantic relationships, not friendships, which I don't want to use the word enemies because that's fairly limited, but contentious relationships. And this is one that's super complicated for parents because our baggage from when we were kids and when we were middle schoolers and when we were high schoolers feels very, very front of mind when our kids are dealing with different kinds of relationships, either in good and beautiful and wonderful ways or in hard and painful and difficult ways. And so for everyone listening, this is really a moment to look at your baggage about this issue, to try to leave your baggage at the door by talking to someone you really trust, a friend, a partner, a therapist, and work super hard at not bringing so much of your own relationship baggage into this conversation. It's not easy. That is a big, big ask. And we know this because we hear from thousands of parents all over the country who say, this is really hard.
I mean, let's talk about that word enemies. It's the perfect word because it's time-stamped, right? It reflects our baggage. I don't think I ever heard my kids utter the word enemy.
No.
Ever.
No.
And yet you say that word and it transports me back to 12 different experiences in my youth where I remember feeling that someone must be my enemy. I mean, that's the baggage.
And the corollary, best friend.
Oh, yes, with the heart necklaces that were broken in half, right, and one wore one half and one wore. These are tropes from our childhood.
That's right.
They truly don't exist today in the same way. I mean, Vanessa, you're so spot on that if we don't leave our own language, concepts, emotional experiences to the side, we cannot help the kids in our life because they use different words, they live different experiences. The times they are changing, right? I mean, it's like, so I think that's the perfect way to toe into it. And this concept of what is a healthy relationship in the first place, which is a class that is taught in school, right? I mean, what I wish I had known if that class had been taught in school when we were growing up, we would have the reframe that you and I are going to discuss today.
Right. Really. We were, to say it another way, no one talked to us about what a healthy relationship was. I mean, if we were lucky, there were conversations about consent, which really focused on sexual consent. Totally, wholly, only sexual consent.
It was rape was the language. Yes.
And there were not conversations about healthy romantic relationships. There were not conversations about healthy friendships. There was maybe a little bit of conversation about bullying, but not really. And frankly, it was a little bit of like, well, that's just how kids are. So it's wonderful that this is part of the vernacular for kids. I mean, in our curriculum that we wrote, we have lessons on healthy relationships. And important to note here, Cara, that, it's tempting to put relationships into two buckets, healthy relationships or unhealthy relationships. But in fact, they kind of exist on a continuum, or relationships can often, or at least sometimes, be a combination of both healthy and unhealthy, or sometimes just, as the kids would say, meh. So I think we
could do a whole episode on meh relationships.
Yeah. Or my favorite, I love this phrase, I feel medium about them, which is like so good. It's kind of like neither here nor there.
It's very healthy, actually.
It's very healthy. So when we think about leaving our baggage at the door, we also want to think about what the tropes were that we grew up with. And in terms of the dynamics of how people treated each other, what gender roles played in how people treated each other, because we grew up, like, for example, the one that we started being taught, at least I did, from like the playground when I was a young kid, that if a boy, as a girl, if a boy was picking on you, pulling your pigtails, teasing you, that meant that he liked you, as in liked you. And it's so crazy to think of the paradigm that sets up.
Everything about that is bananas.
It's bananas. And
it's bananas.
Our parents and our teachers thought they were doing right by us by making us feel better, or sort of perpetuating, I'm sure, some version of that narrative that they were taught. But it is so messed up to be like, this person is treating you badly, but that means they like you, which means you should be flattered and put up with being treated badly.
And seek out that treatment in the future because it validates how someone else feels about you. And by the way, the narrative is just as destructive for the boys. Treat them badly, and they will come to see that you like them. Now, of course, there are a lot of reasons why one kid might treat another kid badly. And some of them might have to do with not knowing how to manage, name, label, sort of compartmentalize all of the feelings that they have, whatever those feelings are. But it was literally, Vanessa, like, I have a label maker, as you know, and I love my label maker. It's like you could have taken my label maker and typed out, "He likes you," and stamped it over every single one of those interactions. And it was a setup for disaster as women got older. Okay. How about if we're on the between genders, how about when a girl reached out to a guy, it was slutty. You don't call a guy. You don't talk to a boy.
That's forward. You're forward.
That's very suggestive. So I have three brothers, right? My
By the way, I hope people recognize the deep sarcasm in all of those statements, just in case it wasn't clear. That was us being deeply sarcastic.
Yeah, exactly. If you're reading this in an article, insert sarcastic tone. My three brothers, right, used to get incoming from girls who, upon reflection, most of them just wanted to be friends, right? But both they and the girls were told, if you are reaching out or being reached out to, it means there is a sexual request, dynamic, interest, fill in the blank, which, I'm sorry, cuts half the age group out of your potential group of people with whom you might connect and have meaningful friendships. Like that was a thing. You could not have cross-gender friendships without it being, somehow there was some underlying sexual suggestion or right. It was bizarre.
And Vanessa. That was before When Harry Met Sally came out.
Men and women can't be friends.
Men and women can't be friends. And it's funny, Car, because I
again, cue the sarcasm.
Yes, sorry, everyone. Cue the sarcasm. I was a very, I had lots of guy friends growing up. I did not subscribe to the sort of girls can't be friends with boys. I also didn't subscribe to the hey, you can't reach out to a guy or ask a guy. If I was romantically interested in them, I would let them know.
But what did the world think of you? I'm just sort of curious, even though you had this ability to rise above what the rest of society would think or say, Did the rest of society go along with your
I mean,
approach?
I certainly wasn't like your typical middle school or high school or college girl in doing that, or woman. Like, I was definitely outside of the norm. I don't feel like I was punished for it. Like, I don't feel like it sort of kept me, I had really wonderful male friendships, which was great. I also had lots of great romantic relationships. So I didn't feel like I was punished. I think it took a little bit of inner strength and sense of self to be like, hey, this is who I am. This is how I'm going to approach it. They can go piss off if they don't like it or approve of it. I was never in a position where I was kind of accused of being, quote, fast because I was initiating, relationships with guys.
But you grew up in a time when that wasn't the norm. You did not have a healthy relationships class. You didn't have. So how did that work?
I don't know. I think I'm a third kid. So I kind of like had some sort of filtering or buffering down from my siblings about like a little bit of what's BS and what's not BS. I think my mom was, as many of you have met both of our moms online, they were very much ahead of their times in many ways. And they were sort of like, it was the 70s. And while they, I guess, missed the women's movement in some ways, like they were already married and mothers when the women's movement really took off, I felt like there was messaging that it was okay to be a strong girl and a strong woman. So maybe that's, I don't know. I think sometimes we just are who we are. And Cara, I swear I would some mornings go to school and say to myself, like, I'm not going to talk a lot today. I'm going to be quiet today because like the nice girls are quiet and I'm too much and I'm too loud or whatever. And I couldn't do it.
Okay. But I want to pick apart that word nice.
Right.
Because I don't think that's the right word in that sentence. I actually think what you meant to say, or what most women who were like you, who were striving to push against this social boundary and doing it very successfully, frankly, it wasn't about being a nice girl. It was about being an attractive girl.
Right.
It was
and
about
nice as in the biggest air quotes possible. It was to be appealing. And that was like grade school. And then I reached a certain point, I think by middle school, which I'm actually so grateful for, that I was like, you know what?
F that.
This is who I am. I can tell myself in the morning I'm going to go to school and not raise my hand and answer every question the teacher asks and not beat the crap out of the guys in the kickball game or the football game. But like, I couldn't help it. This is who I was. And I made peace with who I was. And I think
so evolved, Vanessa.
What?
So evolved. It's so evolved. I mean, it really is.
I don't think I had a choice. Like, I think it was either be who I was or feel so much sacrificing who I was. And what I like to think is that I found friends who appreciated me for who I was, and that I found romantic partners who were cool with it. Like that there was something about my being different from other people that was like appealing to them, and that I kind of self-selected into those relationships.
But it also required that you suspended disbelief around the within gender tropes. Okay. So
yes.
And we got to talk about those, because all we've talked about so far is how guys behave towards girls and how girls behave towards guys, which is like fully, heteronormative and all those things. Right. So now let's like go to the within gender, because you and I grew up at a time where we were taught the mean girls trope, right? Which is girls get mean because they're jealous. And that sort of phenomenon is, it's like a beehive calling the bees back home. It's like you're either with us or against us. And there's a whole, there's internal conflict that is presumed within a gender. And by the way, honey, when you get home and say when your mom says to you, how was school? And you say, so-and-so and so-and-so were so mean to me. The answer will always be, well, they're just jealous. They're just jealous.
Right. And so much of my career has actually been about pushing against the mean girl narrative. I think it is so destructive for all kids and all people. I think it's awful what it does. And I would point people to two different books if this is something you're thinking about or struggling with. One is Rachel Simmons' book, The Curse of the Good Girl, which it just was beyond eye-opening for me. The book came out at least 10 years, I think maybe even 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the other is Lisa D'Amour's book, Untangled, about teen girls, which offers another perspective. But really, Curse of the Good Girl just helped me understand what we're seeing on the surface of girls, sort of this, unkind behavior, leaving people out, the sort of extreme version that we see in the movies and shows was described by Rachel in such a helpful way, which is that girls don't feel permission to express difficult feelings openly because of this nice girl, again, air quotes.
Right.
And so when you repress feelings and you repress difficult emotions, they got to come out. So they come out sideways and surreptitiously and under the surface because the girls don't feel like it's okay to openly express these feelings.
And I would add to that there was a self-fulfilling prophecy piece to all of this, which is way before you ever experienced mean girl culture back in the day. You were told, brace yourself. Mean girl culture is coming.
Right. That's right.
So the path was laid, right? You knew where, and of course, we all know when someone says something's going to go down a certain way, then when you get the first hint of it, the first sniff of it, you end up being so sure that, oh, yep, everything I was told was right, that you go further down that path. They are just mean girls, right? You set up that dynamic internally. You brace yourself for it to protect yourself from it. But really, we became part of our own social problem.
And which is not to say that girls can't be mean to each other. By the way, really? Boys can also be so mean, but we don't have a cultural phrase that's like jerky boys. Actually, we did grow up with the jerky boys. Asshole boys.
Literally,
the jerky boys. Like, there's not a companion, even though boys can be just as mean and just as cruel. But the misogyny of our culture, where girls get targeted as this kind of awful thing that essentially stays with us throughout life. It's like somehow we also never graduate from it. It just becomes like, well, the mean moms or the mean whatever. Like, it just stays with us. Guys don't have that same baggage about when they're crappy to each other, which is totally unfair.
But they have different baggage, and I think their baggage deserves some airtime. I
totally agree.
So their baggage is that they were told when we were growing up that you are non-communicative with no depth of feeling at all. Oafish was sort of the most expressive you could be as a guy. You neither had the feelings nor deserved to have the feelings. You certainly weren't expected to express the feelings. And that set up a phenomenon that, you and I talk about this a lot, is probably informed by hormones. Boys do get quieter when they go through puberty, but they don't not feel.
Right.
They don't not want to express it, right? We have literally this in the 70s and 80s and 90s. We basically said as a society to boys, whatever you feel, you don't say, because to say it is to not be male.
Or you don't express it in some way or another. And,
That's
you
right.
know, it gets,
Well, you can express it in a wrestling ring. You could express it in a boxing match.
You can express it through anger, which it's interesting, Cara, right? Because the boys get permission for anger and the girls, not permission, but they get sort of stuck in this narrow anger corridor, and girls get stuck in this narrow mean corridor. And that's sort of what gets normalized for them. And when we talk to kids, when we talk to middle schoolers and high schoolers, and we name the ways in which they get trapped in these paradigms and the ways in which the world doesn't give them opportunities for larger paradigms, like, hey, boys, it's okay to talk about loneliness and love and sadness and heartbreak. And hey, girls, it's okay to make a joke of some of the dumb stuff that people say to you. And right? Like, when we give them permission to crack open those paradigms, which a lot of the kids, in fairness, are more aware of, certainly, than we were growing up. It's like you can see on their faces, they can't believe that someone is having this conversation with them in a room of hundreds of middle schoolers or high schoolers.
And I'm going to pull out that word that you used in the present tense, get. And I'm going to say, Vanessa, that I think it is fair for us to put it past tense and say got, because I do think generationally, this generation of tween and teen boys knows exactly as you're saying. They know in a more profound and real way that they have feelings and that those feelings are real. And I think they're very aware of how those feelings can get channeled for good or destructively. And I actually think over the past couple of years, with all the conversation around Andrew Tate and other sort of influencers in the manosphere, so much of this conversation proves the point that boys are struggling with what they know to be true. I am a thinking, feeling human. And what they're hearing their trope is supposed to be. And they're like, no, I'm not going to, or I'm confused. But they know in a way that 30 years ago, I actually don't think they knew. I think today there are enough voices out there teaching them about healthy relationships with themselves and with others that they actually do know they have an internal world that deserves acknowledgement.
Right. I think the tension becomes, you know, they may have parents giving them permission to feel this way and to recognizing their full humanity, or maybe educators, teachers, you know, that are doing that. I'm not saying all parents all are. I mean, remember the little boy that we spoke to who said, "Can you please let my parents know it's okay for me to cry?"
What was he, 11? Maybe?
Yeah, I think he was in fourth grade. So yes, in our universe of like people who work with teens and their parents.
And who listen to this
podcast. But there's still a huge universe of people who don't. And then even if the kids are getting that messaging at home, the dominant culture, particularly in 2025, is giving them a very different message about masculinity, about relationships, about belonging, which makes it, you know, really hard. And with girls, they're also getting mixed messages where it's, you know, you can do anything, you can be anyone, and also like you should look like a porn star.
Right.
And so there's that messaging. And then when we think about the LGBTQ plus kids, who essentially, when we were growing up, there was a small group of kids who identified what we said in those days was gay, right? We certainly didn't use the word queer. We certainly didn't have the acronym LGBTQ plus. We certainly didn't have the language for transgender or gender questioning or non-binary, right? Those are all much more recent terminology. And so when we think about the dynamic for those kids and how that's evolved, again, both there's more acceptance and more conversation and more paradigms and more in the culture about how we need to open our world up and be in conversation and be accepting and all of that. And We are also in a culture that is currently shutting down rights and care and resources and safety for those kids. So it's like we're on this weird seesaw, Cara, where things have gotten so wonderfully open and discussed in one way and also so frighteningly shut down in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, the framing of this conversation is what we wish we had known when we were growing up about healthy relationships. And what I hear you say and what I see is that today, we as adults and kids know more about the ingredients that are necessary to make healthy relationships. That's progress. But we, both as adults, and I think the kids would say, we don't yet feel fully supported in providing all those ingredients to create healthy relationships all around us. In other words, those social support services, the information that's accessible online, all the things that we're starting to see challenged today in 2025 are running, they're like headwinds that are pushing down on knowledge that really seems to pervade all types of groups. I don't think there is a person in this country who in 2025 is less aware of what it takes to engage with someone in a healthy way. I don't know that they feel equipped. I don't know that they feel supported, but I do think we've made progress insofar as we do have language for a lot of these things, right?
Right. And that, getting back to what we were taught, which is just like about rape. Now there's all sorts of language about dating violence, about,
that's right.
God forbid, human trafficking. I mean, those are like the sexual assault. Those are the extreme versions, but kids are getting more information and more guidance about the extreme versions. They're also getting more information and more guidance about the sort of medium term aspects of unhealthy relationships. And I'll give you a perfect example. I was talking to a high school girl, and just for people who don't have high schoolers or don't work with high schoolers, one of their biggest concerns, and this is true, this is something we address in depth in our high school curriculum that we're writing, is how do I help my friend that I'm worried? I'm worried about my friend. How do I help my friend? That is the question we get over and over. And it's not that like, hey, this is really about me, but I'm asking for a friend. This is truly, I have a friend I'm worried about and I'm not sure how to help them. And this
for any number of reasons.
It could be substance use. It could be partner violence. It could be eating disorder. It could be depression, anxiety. We get this question in all sorts of ways. But this particular teenage girl said to me, I'm worried about my friend's romantic relationship. Her boyfriend, in this case, it was a heterosexual relationship. Her boyfriend seems controlling and possessive. Her boyfriend is pulling her away from other relationships, right? This was a kid who had an awareness that what she was witnessing in this relationship was an unhealthy relationship. We did not have the language for that when we were in high school. And in fact, the opposite, which was if you had a boyfriend or a girlfriend who was possessive of you, that meant they really loved you and they really wanted to be with you because they were controlling you and jealous and possessive. And that was a good sign.
I mean, this is the point of the whole conversation, right? Is that not only was that adolescent thinking, that was adult thinking. Like it wasn't just because there's so many things that we can point to where we go, oh, the kids think this way and their parents think another. What you just described, there was a very consistent through line where if parents saw that doting, possessive kind of behavior, they too identified it as, wow, they really love each other. Right? And we're here to rewrite that narrative. And this is not the Cara and Vanessa rewrite of the narrative, right? This is the collective rewrite of that narrative.
So, Cara, in an effort to rewrite it, the conversation I had with this teen girl was, how have you talked to your friend about it so far? What do you feel comfortable having a conversation about? And if you need more support from an adult, who could you go to get some support? And this kid said to me, like, hey, I feel like I've kind of done everything I can as me without sort of, I'm worried about losing this friendship if I say or do something that's kind of too far. On top of that, this kid was able to come up with like 2 or 3 adults in the school building who they trusted to go to raise the issue, which is kind of amazing because they really just need one adult who they trust to go to who's not going to sort of blow up the friendship or transgress, their trust in going to them. But then the conversation was, okay, so if you're worried and you're going to go to this adult, what does that conversation sound like?
Right. And I want to insert that one of the defining features of healthy relationships is identifying other people who can be sources of support. So to the adults listening who are thinking, what can I do? I hear you that we were raised with these tropes that are wrong, or, we're trying desperately to flip. What is something we can do? One of the things that you can do as a parent or trusted adult of a kid is to have very open conversations without feeling bad for yourself about the people other than you, who they are going to go to. The healthiest relationships are not little one-offs on isolated islands where no one else is invited in. The healthiest relationships are village-based, right? They are communal. They say, I am always here for you, but so is this person, and so is this person. You have a group that have your back. And it's important because you're not always going to be able to be there. Even if your whole life is about being there, you might be on the phone when they call and you miss their call. You might be at an appointment when they happen to need the thing in that minute where they need to. So just sort of as we start to go through ways to help reshape what we're teaching kids about dynamics, the very first thing you can reshape is that you're not the only one reshaping it. Right?
Right. And that means encouraging your kid to seek out those relationships, to foster those relationships. Because sometimes as a parent, it feels really good to be your kid's go-to person.
Right. It's really vulnerable not to, actually.
Right. And yet, as you always say, like, help them identify. And we work with kids all the time. Like, who's your list? Who are your people? And then, as you always say, Cara, and then make sure those people know if it's not their job to be one of those people, right? Like a dean or a guidance counselor or a pediatrician or a therapist. If it's just like a aunt or uncle or friend, make sure they know that they might be approached with complex questions. But also let your kid know that you want them to seek out these other trusted relationships, that you won't, feel betrayed or abandoned. And thinking about how if you can trust someone in the world is such an important lesson for kids to learn. They're going to be learning that and relearning that over and over again. Which brings us, Cara, to this question of trust and this question of those friendships or relationships that kids have where maybe trust isn't a central tenet to the relationship. There may be more exciting or seductive aspects to the relationship, which might cause the kid to feel really interested in that relationship, might cause a parent to feel a little bit concerned about that relationship, right? Where maybe there isn't trust, but there's some very exciting things. Maybe it's social, maybe there's risk taking, maybe there's like, it could be anything from they have a trampoline in their backyard to they're really into shoplifting and everything in between. And we can't just tell our kids how it's going to go because they've got to figure out their own internal compass about these peer relationships.
I think that's the most common conversation I have with people when they find out what I do for a living is basically what you're describing now, which is, but I see with clear eyes where this is headed or what's happening or what the dynamic is. So how can I not just swoop in and save my kid from a dynamic, especially in the name of healthy relationships, right? If I can see as the parent or the person, the guardian, the person who loves this kid, if I can see where this is going, how hands-off should I be letting them learn their own lesson about a healthy relationship, which is a really complicated thing.
Right.
Like anything else, Vanessa, so much of raising tweens and teens is putting up clear boundaries on the outside and then letting them bounce around in the middle a little bit. So, I've talked to a bunch of kids who, young women who, on reflecting upon their high school and college relationships, will label at least one as toxic. So I always dig into this for them. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, what is that? And why didn't an adult save you from that? And this is a really important question to ask kids when they start describing toxicity, because so often what they mean is there were subtle things that don't fit the mold of healthy relationships. It was that possessiveness. He always wanted to know where I was at all times and got jealous if I was hanging out with another guy as a friend. Classic example.
And by the way, this can happen in friendships as well as.
Oh, yes.
So this is not just a hetero romantic dynamic. This can equally happen amongst friends as well.
And the word she can be subbed in as well. I mean, like really, truly, right? But this is a very common, because the issues, just because our way through has changed over time doesn't mean the underlying issues have changed.
Right.
They're very predictable. So you start talking, okay, so they understand the bounds of a healthy relationship. Was there abuse? No. Physical, mental, social, verbal? No. I never felt assaulted in any way. Okay, great. That's the bar on the outside. That's the wall that we have helped put up that says, if you're hitting up against this wall, now you need to go down a different path in terms of making sure it's a healthy relationship, because anything that bumps up against that wall does not qualify as a healthy relationship. But short of that wall, he or she is annoying me, feels really needy. They want this relationship more than I want this relationship. They want this relationship less than I want this relationship. They're asking me to show up for things where none of my friends are going to be there. And I'm kind of doing it for them. And I'm always the one to show up for them. And they're not the ones to show up for me. Right? Like all these things that haven't changed over time. They're all the same asks. Which are today sometimes labeled as toxic. And at first, I will say, I found this conversation highly annoying because I was like, why do you all need to pathologize everything, right? Why do you have to call everything toxic? But then I've come to appreciate, Vanessa, that their use of that language is their way of saying, it's not the goal for me. This isn't a healthy relationship. I want something that looks and feels different from this. I want something that feels a little bit more give and take. And yeah, maybe I'm pushing it by using the language toxic. I get that. But I'm just telling you, I'm setting up my own limits, my own defining terms about what healthy looks like. And I'm trying to bounce around and figure it out. And you know what? I'm going to step back from that relationship, or I'm going to show up to all these parties. One of my kids went on a first date, and the first date was an invitation to a party. So there was no dinner. There was no like sort of one-on-one time. Showed up at the party, didn't know anyone at the party. And the person who had asked them out and said it's a date and asked them out and asked them to be there totally blew them off. I knew that was going to happen. It's totally predictable. But it was a good awkward, painful experience for them to go to because they were like, yeah, no, that's not what I'm looking for. Wasn't unhealthy, but it wasn't what they were going for.
Yeah. I mean, I think what that's about is about getting really granular with our language and about helping kids get underneath their initial reaction to someone's behavior, someone's treatment of them, their treatment of the other person, right? Like that it's sort of, I don't want to call it lazy, but it's easier to just slap on different labels,
That's right.
particularly labels that get used over and over again, like on places like TikTok and other social media platforms. The trick is actually to help them dig underneath and think about, well, is this really hurtful or is it just irritating? Like,
Right.
do I not want to be friends with this person or do I not want to hang out with them in these settings? Am I not romantically interested in this person, but I feel pressured? Or, do I like someone else and I'm just looking for an excuse to get out of the relationship? So I think helping them figure that out, and it's not easy because it can seem really judgy, like we can sound really judgy. And the trick card is, how do we get into conversations with kids about their relationships, either that we're worried about or they're worried about, without pushing them into the arms of a person or a relationship that we think is probably not the best for them?
Well, I think that's the $64,000 question, also timestamped because that's not worth as much anymore. That is it. It's like, Vanessa, what's your advice? Answer your own question.
I think it's about getting curious in a way that feels kind of generally like, well, what's the norm amongst your friends? Are people always kind of tracking where other people are on Snap Map, or is that unusual? Or what's the norm? Does it usually take people 24 hours to text someone else back? Or is that different from what most people do? What typically happens when folks are dating? Do they have issues if they want to hang out with their guy friends if they're dating a different guy? Or, is it sort of understood that there's certain parameters? Obviously, in my position, you should be able to hang out with whoever you want to hang out with, regardless of like what your partner says, but that's like a whole other thing. But again, these are the kinds of questions that you want to get at, instead of saying, I don't think it's okay that, this person that you like is taking 24 hours to get back to you. That's not your opening salvo. Your opening salvo is like, give me a sense of what the norms are. If you're watching your kid cry themselves to sleep at night because they're not hearing back from the person they like, that's when you step in and you say, hey, it seems like you need some boundaries here. And with friendships also, like, well, that person got mad at you for not including them in this thing, but they also hadn't included you in their thing. So I don't understand what the quid pro quo is. I feel like, Carter, you would have a different approach than this.
Well, I really like that approach, but I think that the shift I would make is away from norm, because I think while it's important to know what the norms are, and norms often dictate how our kids feel or respond to things, it strikes me that the more important thing than the norm is how you feel relative to the norm. So what's the norm is the first half of the question. And then it's like, okay, well, if that's what everyone else is doing, doesn't seem like you feel that way based upon how this is going, or this feels like this, is pretty normal, but
normal isn't always good or right.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But you're crying yourself to sleep every night. So something's not adding up. And this conversation, that exact framing of a conversation, literally allows you to put your baggage aside. Because what you're doing as the adult is you are asking them to tell you, this is where the beauty of the norming is. You're asking them to tell you, what's life like today for you, in your community, in your school, in your body, in your, what's life like for you today? And then how does it feel? And there's no room, Vanessa, for our lived experience in that conversation. Occasionally we might say, wow, it's so different from when I was growing up, but like it really forces the lens on them. And when they engage in that conversation, what they are telling you is, I am ready to start tapping into how I feel, putting words on it, and sharing it with you. They might have already shared it with all their best friends their age, but now I'm willing to share it with you. And why does that matter? Because they know you have life experience, because they know you have a different perspective. And when they're willing to open up and share it with you and tell you why what everyone else is doing is not what's working for them, or why they wish what was happening to them was what was happening to everyone else, that's when you can start to be in conversation about, all right, then how do you get from where you are now, point A, to where you want to go in a healthy way? And that's what I wish we had been taught when we were growing up. I wish we knew the sort of the boundaries of the path a little bit better. I wish we knew how to engage with people who have lived knowledge a little bit better. I wish we knew how to put words onto our feelings and onto our status, onto what's happening to us a little bit better. All of those things have moved to a better place today, I think.
And I will just make one plea, which is if you have a kid who's indicated they have ghosted somebody else, which means essentially disappearing, on Snap or text or whatever platform they're communicating on. Maybe they broke up with someone that way. Maybe they've just stopped being in touch with them. That is a very common thing. One of the places I'm very clear with kids and a little less curious and a little more forthright is like, hey, that's not a good way to treat someone or to be treated.
Right.
And that may be what people are, quote, doing these days. But it's not respectful and it's not healthy. And it doesn't respect their needs or, it doesn't show respect for yourself. And so let's talk about how that could have been handled differently. It doesn't mean they're going to turn around and handle it differently in that moment.
That's right.
But hopefully it means they'll make different choices or accept different behaviors the next time around.
Vanessa, what I'm grateful for this morning is the healthy relationship I have with you.
I was like, where is this going? You mean in our matching navy sweaters? We're twins.
We're twinning. Only the YouTube viewers can appreciate our twinning.
It's true. It's true. Thanks, Cara.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.